Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with the Superlative podcast. Be sure to listen to our other aBlogtoWatch podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest news and reviews. Today on Superlative, once again, I am joined by the illustrious George Bamford for an experimental conversation. Are you ready for this? Something new, George?
I'm a bit scared that you said experimental, but yes, I'm here. I'm kind of like, what are we going to be talking about? This is kind of going to be interesting.
You've hit on the primary weakness of the watch industry, where they say, "Show me where it's been done before." The industry that celebrates innovation and originality. The first question is, "Show me who's done it before and succeeded."
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Every single time. Who's made money from this? Who's done this before? Have we done this before? They don't ask in 1950 if someone said, "Has someone done this before?" No, they never asked that question. But today, there must be some type of historical validation.
Yeah, you're right. The historical validation. I'm sure someone has done this before. But yeah.
It's risk aversion. It's just ugly risk aversion.
Yes, exactly.
That's all it is. That's all it is. And we're talking about that because George and I spend a lot of time talking about the watch industry. And the hope of this conversation is not just to talk about watches, but to expand outside of the topic of watches between people who like watches. My belief, and George, I think you share this, is that if you like someone because you're interested in what they have to say about timepieces, there's probably other things that they find interesting, other hobbies or ideas that you'd like to hear from them. So what I'd like to do with certain episodes of Superlative, and we'll see where it goes, is find someone like yourself who is unabashedly a watch collector. You have a badge somewhere, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
You got your badge. Good.
I think I've joined kind of like the Alcoholic Anonymous version of that, the Watches Anonymous.
Oh, you're in recovery already.
I kind of go in and out of recovery. It's kind of one of those things. No, I'm not going to buy this year. And then, that watch comes out and you're like going, no.
An amazing sketch would be a look inside of wristwatch rehab, right?
Oh, yeah. Because you really say, oh, no, if I get that one, I don't need to buy another one or, if I do that, and shift that one off, and then you sell something and then you go, or you give it on to like someone else and you think this is amazing for them. And then you go, fuck, I really wish I was wearing that watch again.
Well, the compulsion to collect with us, I think is really what is the glue that binds all the collectors. I mean, I've talked to people on this show and otherwise who are fascinated by this classification, if you will, of collector, right? Oh, yeah. They see it as I don't know if it's a personality type or maybe like a mental disorder, right? It's somewhere in between, right?
I think it's a mental disorder because I'm looking around my office at the moment and I've realized that I know we're talking about something else collecting, but I collect vintage Snoopies and I've got tons of toys of vintage Snoopy around my office. Everywhere there's a vintage Snoopy that I look. And you're like going, am I really that nuts? And then I'm like going, yeah, but it makes me smile.
And it really comes down to that. But there's a certain compulsion where people, and maybe it's actually all people, maybe some people have just turned it into hobby, surround themselves with things that make them smile. But I think what's more interesting above and beyond merely decorating your home with things that make you smile is the hunt, the pursuit, the intellectualization, the searching, you know? Yes. And I have for a long time wanted to get inside of the minds of fellow watch lovers to figure out what else they're passionate about, what I like to learn from them, because it's undeniable that this hobby is a friendship hobby now. It's a social hobby. But then you ask yourself, well, it's not like everyone likes cars gets along. Why is it people that like watches get along better than most other sort of hobbies? And I think a lot of it is because of a sort of shared sense of curiosity and wanting to collect versus all being into the same stuff. If anything, there's more we disagree on than perhaps we agree on the watch hobby, but it's the things that we agree on that make us feel less alone in a room together.
Yeah, you're right on that. And I also would say is you kind of I don't know. I look at it and there is something quite good about the watch community because people take you down their own stories. With cars, it is, but it's a totally different story side. I mean, it is a totally different arc. And if you are, into race cars, you're into race cars. If you're into this, you're into this. But quite a lot of people that collect watches will appreciate everything from a G-Shock or a regular £15 Casio or $15 Casio all the way up to a Richard Mille. And people will appreciate every side of it. And they'll be appreciating vintage as well, because there is that appreciation on every side, where sometimes with cars, there is oh, you're this or you're that. Or it's kind of like same with bicycles. If you're a road bicyclist or a fixie or a mountain bike, you kind of don't mix.
Yeah, I don't want to get along with those fixie people. It seems so impractical. It's so dangerous. I mean, what's wrong with you people?
But that's proof and point. Proof and point. and that's the kind of thing where I'd say to you is, you're either a this or you're that. And that's where we are kind of like, maybe it's from the watch world, but I think it's that kind of understanding and appreciating design and appreciating either movement or whatever it is. But you can really, if you can see a hobby really flourish in someone that can collect the most, I remember I had a friend of mine that only collects swatches. And it was his obsession to collect Swatch watches. And he had a room dedicated to Swatch watches.
You mean the loudest room ever?
Well, yeah, I mean, but every limited edition egg and all those different things.
Well, because of how loud they tick. Yeah. That's my. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't. But it was one of those things, and it was a room, and he had everything on shelves and all the limited editions, and he took me in there. Now, I like Swatch as much as the other person. I grew up on Flick Flack, but I walked around there and I was like, wow, this is freaking cool. I wasn't the lover that I thought I was going to be, but you appreciate the design, the packaging, the engineering. And I think that's what we all do.
Yeah, I mean, we could forever find permutations of we all appreciate this, we all appreciate that, and we'd be right, still kind of hovering around some core psychology that we might never get to or might never appreciate because it's too reptilian or something. But what's also funny is when the hobby attracts people who we don't necessarily want to be associated with. And we're just sort of musing about this guy in Los Angeles, a timepiece gentleman, I think his name's Anthony Farah,
yes.
Got several years in prison, deservedly so, right? But there's this weird feeling when there's like an immoral or criminal person that likes watches. I mean, I was just on TV and there was Putin, okay? And Putin's always been big with his watches, and he makes this big show where he takes his watch off, sticks it on the desk right in front of him. This is all on TV, right? To sign papers. Like he like lays it down.
What watch was it?
It's
I know that sounds strange, but I don't care about him signing papers. I'm like, what watch is he wearing?
I forgot the name of it. It's a higher end brand produced by Raketa. So it's a Russian watch. Obviously, he used since the invasion of Ukraine, he stopped wearing anything but Russian watches. So he's been wearing this, but so it's made in Russia. He's very cognizant. Don't wear a Swiss watch, even though like he loved his Blancpains for years and stuff like that. Known watch collector. But he sets it down on the table in a very specific way. Doesn't just plop it there. You could tell it's sort of a studied way he puts it down. And, he proceeds to, and what's also interesting is he's the rare person who's right-handed, but wears his watch on his right wrist, right?
Wow.
Like that's a rare thing to do. I'm weird because I'm left-handed and I wear my watch on my left wrist. So I'm equally low percentile like he am in a different way. And I'm watching this with my son.
So that's the weirdest thing to wear. Yeah, because if you're right,
right? So I'm like pointing it out. I'm like, this guy is, could be considered one of the 21st century's most evil dudes, according to a lot of people. And we all know. Super watch lover. I mean, you and I could nerd out with him about timepieces like anyone else and totally enjoy ourselves. Yeah. Be afraid for our lives the entire time. But you have to admit, criminals or good human beings, this hobby attracts them all.
It does, and I would say. So you were talking about the person in LA, and whatever the case is, I said to you, I wished I'd met him, because at least you would have had a story of like, oh, I met him once. I never did, and I just read the story, and I'm like going, oh my God, how did it? You know, and I felt sorry for everyone that was involved, but you almost feel like, you know, you would have kind of, there's certain people, and I'm sure you and I have met loads of dodgy people in certain ways, but it's one of those things. This has been very public in the watch world.
Yeah. What is it about this guy? Because there's been a lot of criminals in the retail space. This guy looked like he made a series of bad decisions, was overly optimistic, ended up in sort of a circle of lies, but it didn't begin with what I would call a planned criminal enterprise. Yeah. He took advantage of misplaced trust. He took advantage of a certain degree of hipness and popularity to sort of the watch flipping thing he was in. He was mostly a parasite, right? Where others would have said, let's have a symbiotic relationship. He says, nah, I'm just going to steal from you and hope down the line to be able to pay you back. He's really guilty of lying and really, really bad decisions. But why is it that he's captured the attention? People talk about this guy a lot, whereas I think there's comparatively maybe less discussion of the other criminals. Like, you tell me, why is this guy captured so much of the imagination?
I don't know. And that's what when I read the articles, I'm like, oh, okay. He's done a kind of Ponzi scheme on watches, but kind of not to a degree. I don't know. It's when you look at it, there is other people and there's other, and you don't, you know, I never would say to you as you look at it and you go, you relish in the downfall, because I don't relish in anything on that. I don't go, oh, you know, but I read the article going, so how, you know, and I'm sure it's more that thing of forewarned, forearmed. And for me as a shopper of watches, you know, it's given me some kind of, I don't know, not alarm bells, more kind of maybe totem poles that you would look for in any of these retailers to just understand how he did it. That for me
he operated similarly to many people who are not criminals, but simply act with more responsibility. For example, not selling someone else's watch to pay off a debt, right?
Yeah.
But this activity happens all the time. Yeah. Where we trust people to do something which is just legwork of, I want to get rid of this watch. Yeah. I don't want to handle it. You're talking to people all day long. Like, guys like this operate all the time, and most of them
but also auction houses as well. You know, auction. Oh. You know, no. But I know you're umming and ahhing, but you consign watches to auction houses. You know, if you look at it, that's one of the things they'll say. Hey, this is the price. You know, you will say to I don't know, any retailer that's doing vintage. You know, they'll go, do you want money now, or would you like to do on consignment, and we can see if we can get a bit more, and we'll split the and, you know, split the upside. And I think, so you go, and there's been multiple times where I've done that. I've quietly got rid of this watch or that watch, and, you know, the guys are like, what do you want to do? Do you want the cash now, or would you like this? You know, this is a buy it price, or here's a kind of consignment price.
So when working these individuals, and I think this goes into how to trust these folks, what do you look for in terms of signs to not trust them?
Well, that's the thing, is when you look at this gentleman, quite a lot of those signs I would have thought that he was legit.
Why?
Because, you know, the LA store, you know, there's a few things where you would have gone,
too young, too confident, too fast. Those are all warning signs.
Yeah, okay, I understand that, but let's say, I don't know, let's. Yeah, I'm one of those that probably, if I got introduced and someone said, yeah, he's the best at selling, and, you know, he's a street fighter for this, and, you know, and he's the one that could make them. I probably would have. I would have been, you know, I would have gone, yeah, okay, you know, I'll try him with one.
Is selling watches that hard and unpleasant?
Sometimes.
Yeah. That's what I tell people. Consider like a marriage. So like this last several years of like investor this, investor that, I'm like, buying watches is fun. Selling them sucks.
Oh, and it is one of those things. It's but saying that, like I brought a watch recently, and I was just like, and I dealt with a new dealer, and it was so seamless. It was so, but the thing is, if I was selling it back to him, I think it would be the opposite. I think, and that was the interesting thing. Some of them, it's absolutely amazing. I dealt with a Japanese dealer last year, and it was the nicest experience ever. And
you mean buying a watch? Buying
a watch. No, but even recently, so I brought it last year. Before Christmas, the Japanese dealer said, if you want to sell it back to me anytime, this is what I'd buy it for now. And then I'll keep in touch with you. Now, that's the first ever time a dealer's gone, that's and it's not it's a Seiko watch, and it's not a fortune, but it was a really great experience. And even down to how it came and everything, I was just like, it's a joy. And that's what you said about sometimes it's a pain in the ass when you're trying to jettison something, or, when something is not 100% correct. There is this kind of scorched earth around you. You don't know what you're talking about, or you don't. And I think that sometimes, so you have this duality in your mind.
It's funny because this enters the sort of being able to judge an object versus being able to judge people. And I can't speak for others, but a lot of us, not all of us, I think are better at judging things than people. And there are people out there that are far better at judging people than things.
Oh, yeah.
And they have other advantages, right? Like
call that my wife versus me. I am the worst judge of people and objects. I'm very, very good. My wife is the best judge of character. And so, yeah.
In an ideal situation, you're paired up with someone that complements your weakness, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the ideal situation.
That's my ideal situation now.
But I think it's important to recognize that just because you're really good at looking at the technical specifications and the design merits of a tool, a person can deceive. A machine can't deceive you. There's no lies, right? It's either steal or it isn't, right? Yeah. I mean, there's fakes and things like that. But at the end of the day, the item's the item. People can mess with you. They can adjust course real fast. They can provide evidence which is misleading. And as people that like to investigate and study, I wonder if there's ever a solution to that, right? Because the people that sort of get people well, it's not like it doesn't seem to be as an outcome of studying them and being like, oh, that's what they're statistically likely to do. It's like they're reading into something else. And I wonder if our brains are just either or. Like we're going to be watch nerds or people nerds, but not both.
Yeah, probably actually. You're totally right. It's, actually that is right. Yeah. Because I'm crap on the judgment on that side.
Look, I mean, you acknowledge that there's folks of us out there that are so curious about this shared passion we have and this propensity, this rare propensity for watches to allow grown adult males to form friendships.
Oh yeah,
they can't stop thinking about what's magical or special about this hobby, because it's not the same with alcohol or tobacco, because there's something about an intoxicant that. It's just like, there's a difference between like, we all like getting messed up together versus we all like to study this topic and exchange notes.
Yeah. And it is that. It's kind of like, when I said to you about Seiko, I've gone down a rabbit hole, rabbit warren, rabbit everything on discovery of Seiko. And I've only scratched the surface. And that's the weirdest thing, is that I didn't even look at them before, and now I'm just obsessed. I'm like,
why didn't you look at them?
Because I don't know. I was a G-Shock person, and so for me that was, and Casio, and I was that side, and and then I don't know. I went and discovered Seiko, and I was just like, the history, the design, the everything about it, that everyone's going to go on this and go, you're an idiot, George. But it wasn't that I was an idiot at the time. I just probably turned my nose up a little bit.
Well, there's a tendency on the Swiss side for it to be like brand versus brand.
Yeah.
And the reality is, it's not like Casio or Seiko or Citizen are like better. You can't rank them. They're all cool. They've done some redundant things. They've done some unique things. But I've studied these three companies extensively, more than other people, and I never rank them. I never even thought to rank them. I have my preferences. I have things I like more than others. There's decisions that I can agree with more or less. But like each of those companies has undeniably done awesome things that merit specific attention.
But you go into something like the Seiko 5s, and you go into some, and you just, anyway, I said to you I wasn't going to talk much about watches, but what I would say...
You kind of like watches, George.
I do like watches. And that's the thing is, I think to myself is this discovery. I love the idea of dial combinations, case combinations, things like bullheads. And just, I look at even Breitling and their bullhead. And then when you go through the different bullheads, I look at all these watches and I go, I like when someone is pushing the envelope. And Seiko, and this is, mea culpa, is I kept on looking over them and I shouldn't have. And a year and a half ago, I sipped the Kool-Aid of Seiko and I fell in love with Seiko, and I just am like, and, I wear Seiko a lot. I think that they did push the envelope. They pushed the envelope of digital. They pushed the envelope on some of these case designs, dialed colors. And the limited edition nature was already embedded in this brand.
I think it's great. Maybe you could have waited. I feel like we need to have brands that we save for later in life, right? To like lengthen out the enjoyment of the hobby.
You will, you'll drive I don't know. When you grow up, you'll drive in, you'll get into a Rolls Royce or a Bentley, or you have to grow up into something.
But what's funny? If you start high end from the beginning, it oddly does not preclude you from going backwards. Like if you start out in life driving Bentleys, like yourself, you can go back to Volkswagen.
We weren't going to talk.
The analogy sticks, though. You could, if you start at the top of a ladder, you still have a lot in a mainstream car like Volkswagen to nerd about, right? It doesn't negate it.
Oh, no, it definitely doesn't. And so for me, just to set the record straight,
Please.
My first car was a Mark II Golf, and it was meant to be a GTI, but it wasn't. It was a GT because I couldn't afford the assurance. And it was a 1 liter, but it looked like a GTI because I put everything that made it look like a GTI. And I was really like one of those, this is so freaking cool. And it was the coolest car. I mean, like literally, I think I did about 60,000 miles on it, and I loved, and it was boxy, it was cool. Anyway, and it had the tartan interior, and I hark back to the old cars, and so that was one of those things where I would say to you is, no, it was my haven on that.
So let's get into the sort of topic of the other things that you're passionate about, either before watches or in combination with watches. You are a prolific collector. This is known. You spend a lot of your time doing that. But a lot of this starts early on. What were some of the initial, we'll call them categories, that you collected, that you acquired around you, even maybe just information, prior to you ever seeing yourself as a watch lover?
Okay, so this is the weirdest thing, because when you asked me, hey, let's talk about collecting, I was thinking, well, what are the things that I collected when I was younger? And for me, I used to collect, and I've got a very big collection still to this day of something called Beanos and Dandies. And these are comic books, and they're very old school, very British in their own way. And I used to collect the albums, and there was a bookstore near my home where I grew up, and I used to go there, and they had vintage ones all the way back to the first ones. And I collected them as a kid. So what I mean is like when I was, I don't know, from about 8, 9, 10, 11, and I've still got this collection, and it is like piled high of all the vintage ones from the Beanos and Dandies. And I used to, because of being dyslexic, I could never read them, but I used to look at the images and I used to look at the cartoons, and I got lost in Desperate Dan and Dennis the Menace and things like that. And so that was my childhood of kind of like just looking at something in a different way.
I think it's interesting to have the experience, and I don't think you should take this for granted, where you go to the store, and in addition to having the new stuff, they have a collection of the old stuff. Just by mere virtue of them having this signifies to you there's value to these old things. Yeah. There's a collection of them here. You could have something like that at your home, but if they just had the new ones, I don't know that you or many other kids or people would ever even form the idea of, I should collect something that came out before now. Yeah. I think that's actually an interesting step to take. Not everyone even reaches that. Some people just get the things that are new.
Well, and I think let's. I know it sounds strange, but it's like, could you imagine if you discovered 24 again, the series? You know,
I never actually saw it. The Kiefer Sutherland one?
Yeah, Kiefer Sutherland. Or
I didn't see them.
So let's say any big series that you like. Could you imagine if you started it brand new again? You went back to the beginning, and you know, you've been living in the world of the latest ones, but actually you went back to the beginning and you rediscovered. That for me was the greatest thing, is I felt that there was each album was going back in time, but I got more. Because I loved the, you know, Christmas, I got given the Christmas the album for this year. It was like the Guinness Book of Records. You would get that, or you would get the Beano and Dandy. And I was very lucky. I got the Beano and Dandy. And then I found that I could get the vintage ones, and they were cheap. And I looked, so I pulled off, because you asked me about things, I pulled out, and they used to write the price in the front thing. And it was my pocket money, and it was 50p, or so let's say, a quarter or two, you know.
Yeah, cheap.
It was cheap, but it was really cool because I could go and say, okay, I'm going to get some sweets, and I'm going to get one of those. And that was the coolest thing, because I learned about, you know, this collecting, but using my money.
Did you share those with other people?
Yes. Yes, I did, but it was always in my bedroom. It was just like, there was a stack underneath the sink. And I was just like, this is kind of, it was just, that was where it was.
So it was the artwork which attracted you.
Yeah. And the comic styling. I loved the comic styling. And so that was for me one of those discovery moments. And it was the first kind of like, I kept on begging to go back to that comic book. You know, it was kind of every 2-3 weeks I'd go there and I'd go, oh yeah, no, I'm like that. No, I don't.
I have to compare with my experience, which is not too dissimilar. No, I did not get Dandy comic. But I went to comic book stores, and that was actually an early thing for me. And similar to you, I didn't read a lot of them. In fact, I would collect cards from certain like card games.
Oh.
I would collect comic books without necessarily reading them because I was attracted by the art. I remember specifically thinking, I'm looking for cool art. And we know when we looked at that world, there is good art, there's bad art, and there's a lot in the middle.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff which is like considered to have great stories sometimes have like really lackluster art. And I'm like, screw that. If I can't look at something amazing, right? Once in a while, you'll have good art and good writing.
No,
Once in a while.
You're right. I would say to you is the art was good, but it was more the entertainment of like, you know, Desperate Dan eating a cow pie. And there was these fun things.
It's amusing. It's amusing.
It made me smile and it took me to another world.
And it's interesting that you and I and others began, and it's no one really thrusted upon us. It's sort of like we're young shoppers in a commercial environment. We don't need to do things like buy food, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not the need. But we're learning how to be young consumers. We both grew up in these consumer-friendly environments. And when presented with choice, rather than buy junk, I mean, we all knew those kids that would buy toys and forget about them. Yeah. we had like, because it wasn't just that it made it happy, but we had this, and again, tell me if you disagree, we knew it would continue to make us happy. We permanently wanted to own these things.
Yeah, so I used to go to my bedroom floor and just sit there and look at them. So yeah, I'd say, and I'm not saying that I couldn't read. I just didn't read much. So it was kind of like it was those bite size that actually kind of worked.
Well, it's not even about that. It's about what interested you, right? Because some kids like they want to know the story. Yeah. I think you and I might even need to put myself in there. You wanted to invent the story a little bit. Yeah, you wanted to see pictures that allowed your own imagination to go off where it would.
Definitely. I would say to you is I did buy sweets as well. So that was my, you said we didn't buy
yeah, but you didn't need to buy to keep yourself alive like an adult.
But for me, I was like, oh my God, I loved anyway.
I'm just saying, as an adult, you go to the supermarket, like, what am I going to collect for my refrigerator? You have to make a bunch of practical decisions. You can't get to be like, well, then I'm going to go to the, oh my God, I can't think of a single section in the supermarket that has anything even remotely collectible. Jeez. But like what I'm saying is as a kid, you have the luxury of being able to just buy for pleasure. And that's why a lot of kids, I think, get into this, because if it only did it later in life, I don't know how many adults would be like, I've had to spend money on boring stuff and services for so long and taxes and bills. All of a sudden I can collect stuff. No, I just don't know that happens. I think if you don't do it at a young age, it may, I don't think anyone at 50 is like, it's fun to spend my disposable money on stuff that makes me happy. Yeah. Like you learn it young.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right. And that was where I was like, what were the things that kind of excited me? So, when I said to you the first time I got given a really nice watch that was a Breitling Navitime, that was my first kind of, that excited me because of engineering and I was a kid that used to just take everything to bits.
Take it apart?
Take it apart because that was how I learned. So I learned by doing, not learn by reading.
And as a parent, how do you allow this in a constructive way? I'm still trying to figure this out.
I can't give any parenting advice because that would be the worst thing on earth. You don't want to know my parenting advice. But no, how would I explain it to you? I think my parents were very good. They put a latch on the outside of my door later on because they realized that I could get out at 4 o'clock and go and take the VCR or the TV to bits.
That's poor VCR. I took apart 3 VCRs at least.
Oh yeah, no. And juicers. We had a juicer at home. This was like revolutionary. We had a juicer, and I thought amazing. And I took the restrictors off, and this thing just would like blow through oranges like it went out of fashion.
Oh, they had a restrictor?
Yeah, so there was a restrictor on the actual motor. Oh. And so I took the restrictor off going, yeah, this is going to be cool. The thing only lasted probably about 5 weeks because it just blew. So that's kind of, I think my parents thought, give him a watch and he'll learn how to take it to bits himself. And I did. And all I had was a penknife and a Glasses screwdriver. And that was how my life started.
Did you take the Breitling apart?
Oh, yes. It was so 1994. 4 or 5, my parents brought it. I asked my parents how much they brought it for, and it was £500. Okay. And they gave it to me for Christmas, and by Boxing Day, it was in pieces.
Did they know it was going to be a sacrificial watch?
No, but I think in the back of their mind they were thinking, yeah, this is not going to last that long. But actually, what I would say to you is what. I put it back together. I've still got it. It sits in my safe. It's one of those things that it's been back to Breitling probably about 10 times. During COVID, so I was teaching my son how to take pocket watches to bits during COVID. And during COVID, we took it to back to pieces, and then my watchmakers told me off because I didn't put something back in the right place. So I am one of those that's probably the worst watchmaker ever, because I do everything very heavy-handed. So if you look at the back of this Breitling, there is just dents and gouges on the back of the case. Even on the lugs, there's dents. I've broken the glass 4 times. The hands have been bent. I mean, but I love it, and it makes me smile anytime I put it on, because I'm just like, actually, this is something that is embodied my first ever kind of like, wow.
So I have the complete opposite experience with the early watches I messed with. I have like, for lack of a better term, like a watch graveyard, right?
Oh.
Like I still have them, but they're the watches that stopped working. I decided like, oh, Ariel's going to tinker around because like once in a while I could fix it and I got overly confident.
Oh, yes. Oh,
I remember one time a watch came and a screw came loose and lodged itself in the escapement. Of course, the escapement can't spin if there's a screw in there.
Yeah.
So I took the screw out. I put it back in where it's supposed to go. I couldn't imagine how this one screw got loose and everything else was fine, but whatever. And to me, I fixed something. This is years ago. I had been collecting watches for a small amount of years. And since then, once in a while, I have something, and it's usually magnetized or something that you can't see, and I didn't have the tools for that. So I just had this little box, and like I refuse to look at them. It's like the shame pile. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I meant well. I don't want to look at you.
You're like that kid on in Toy Story that's over the fence. That blows up his toys.
I'm like toy killing villain.
You're like, I know. I've got a graveyard of watches. I have a graveyard of watches.
It's not grotesque, okay? It's not grotesque.
No. But it is also that thing of like, hey, I can fix it. And for me, even when I would say to you is when I first drove and all those things, I was the one that I wired up my car. I electrocuted myself multiple times. I'd fix the engine. I was always one of those people that would try, but then I'd have to verify because it would be like I'd try, it would work. And then I'd get down half, a couple of hours down the road and the engine would be like, oh, there's a clunk now instead of a clank, and I'm like, okay, great. So I would say to you is I am an okay, maybe at best okay engineer in the sense of understanding engineering.
Now, like me, despite your latent interest in mechanical things, that was not your formal education.
Yeah.
I have a communication degree and went to law school. You have, we'll call it also artistic communicative backgrounds. And then another tool entered your life, which is the camera.
Oh my God. So that was one of the nicest experiences. So I was very lucky. I being dyslexic, I couldn't find my avenue, and you kind of think, education you can't connect to, and you can. And I found an amazing teacher, and he was called Mr. King, and he was an amazing teacher, and he was our photography teacher. And he said to me, George, come and learn about photography. Learn about the history of photography. Learn about photography, because I think you will understand it. And there was the Design and Technology Center, and there was the photography area, and he was the art. And I just couldn't get into design and technology, and it was very weird because I should have been in there. But it was all about plan out and theorize on this and do this before you make. And I was always a maker. I wasn't a writer of, I didn't want to write a thesis about, why this would work or why this Apple press would actually work or not. It was like, I know how I'm going to make it and I know how it would be done, but I couldn't get to that point. So I was really, I don't know, I was kind of grinding the gears in the wrong way. And this teacher just went to me and said, have you thought about photography? And I was like, okay. And he said, here's a camera, go and take some photographs. And we will look at how you do it. And I was like, oh, okay, this is an understanding. I took some photographs and I came back. And it was all about the decisive moment. It was always about every image had to tell a story. So it was 36. It was in an old Nikon. Film. Yeah. So it was 36 frames. And, you're lucky when you got 37 frames. That was a miracle sometimes. And I came back in and I developed my own film. And I was like, and the first time that I developed it, and when you had it in the cylinders, and I was just like, and the smell of the liquids and those things, and I was just like there, and and the first time I put it up against a red light and saw that film, not the paper, but the film,
right?
I went, this is cool, because I can instant gratification. It was like literally you take a photograph, you do it, and I was like, this is amazing. And then I went into printing. And printing was, for me, the great thing of like learning, I could, and, now you can retouch everything, you can do everything. But I was learning about dodging and burning and changing the perception of this image to how I felt it should be. So
early editing, so to say.
Yeah, so enhancing. So then this image came alive, and this magic paper produced an image in front of me whilst I was rocking it in a bath. And I was like, my head was just like going, this is awesome. And then it was like, and I can dry it, and I can print this out. And that then became my total obsession at school, total obsession, that I learned about Man Ray, I learned about rayographs, I learned about the history of photography, Lee Miller. I mean, one of the most amazing photographers, war photographers. And I was also into people like Margaret Brock White, that is just literally some of the most famous images that you could have. I mean, everything. I started learning. And, there was, there was a person that I was obsessed with, because she did something called calotypes, and I'm boring people, but basically this was like,
please bore some more. This is what this conversation is about.
You put botanical, she did, Anna Atkins, one of the first female photographers in 18 something, and I could Google it, but it's 18 something and she was the first, and she was a botanist, and she lay flowers onto this paper, and they were blue. So what happened was it was white and blue, and that was a calotype, and there was sienna types and calotypes. I think it was a calotype. I'm now going to.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I forgot.
I'm now going to Google it, because but she was. Let me go forward. So she was 18 something. Okay, but they were most beautiful images, and she was amazing. So I learned about how a paper became magical without even a camera, and then there was the camera oscuro, and then you learned about things like Fox Talbot, and the most amazing thing. This is an English story. You had something called the Magic Mirrors that was based over in France, and the French government backed it, so that was kind of what they call it was the old mercury mirrors. I don't know if you've ever been to a flea market and you see these sheets of glass with people's images on.
I think the items in the flea markets in Los Angeles are much more contemporary than the items in flea markets in potentially England. Just saying.
Well, okay, but basically there was so what we see as modern day photography came from a British man called Fox Talbot. And he was the first one to invent a negative, but he wasn't supported by the UK government, and he should have been supported, and it could have really, really taken off. But
people take for granted modern cameras. They don't realize there's these tiny steps, and it all has a similar origin in optics, and astronomical observation and entertainment. And the actual capturing of the image was quite complicated and took a while.
And that was the most amazing thing. Is so you had Daguerre, that was this French person. He created these daguerreotypes that was these magic mirror silver magic mirror images. And they were done with mercury infusing on the back of them, and it was quite hard to build them and all these things. But they were the calling card for everyone. So you would turn up and you would give one of these magic daguerreotypes as your business card, and it would be your image, because it was very grand. So this is, if you were at the top level, you would give a daguerreotype as your calling card. Oh,
so this is seen as... So I guess if in the generation two before this, did someone who was very wealthy have like a bunch of hand-painted business cards? Like,
probably, but this was the queens, the kings, and everyone would have daguerreotypes done of them, and it would be a very serious thing, and you'd sit for days and days and days. And when you see them, the daguerreotypes, most of the people, they've got braces on their neck because they have to sit in the same position for a very long period of time.
Gosh.
And so the kids sometime, or most of the time, they have their eyes shut.
When did photography become more instant, where you could have a shutter speed that was fast enough for people not to have to pose for a long time?
Well, it was more because before it was almost it was big plate cameras, so it was kind of big negatives, and you had to get a lot of light into it.
Yeah.
I think it was also speed of film.
That's right.
I don't know, and this is where this is not an answer I know, because I'm not that geeky. I'm more, for me, on the thing is I love the history of how these real kind of gems in the world pioneered in something. And, are the kind of unsung heroes of photography, or the unsung heroes of, you think about Kodak. Kodak is really the unsung hero of the digital revolution, but
Sure.
they didn't do it. And,
they could have. There's that big whole thing where they like sat on their hands and they ignored it.
But this is the same, Fox Talbot, that was the first kind of the guy that did the negative. And it was, he was 1800s he was born, so 18 something. He created this negative, and it was a single negative. Now, color is decouplers, and anyway, I can geek out on these things. But why I love the idea of this was, for me, it was an understanding that this person, if he was supported by a government, he could have accelerated, where Daguerre was supported by the French government massively, and he accelerated. And so what happened is it pushed Fox Talbot down. And so we didn't have this massive, huge revolution here in the UK of we were the pioneers on photography.
What years was this roughly? Do you remember? I think the chronology is important.
Chronology, yeah. I'm gonna
because you have photography in any type of modern sense coming about in sort of the, I don't know, was it the mid 1800s?
Yeah. So this was I roughly would say to you is it's saying about 1831, something like that.
Oh, that early.
Yeah. So that's what it's saying here.
Okay. So yeah.
Look, you could trust. You can trust
No, but
Wikipedia.
This was a time where the British government and the French government, for that matter, were both heavily investing in technology. This was the age of enlightenment.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to explore the world and develop new technology, and governments were subsidizing various types of inventors in both countries. And there was real competition, and governments couldn't back everyone. And there was winners and losers, and hits and misses.
And look, he is known for the I think a hit. So for me, that was the thing of.
So the era that I find interesting, ironically going back to Seiko, is I guess during the 1970s and 80s.
Yeah.
When Asia made not just photography, but all types of media recording equipment, something that most people could afford. We take for granted today that these things are easily accessible, but it wasn't until they really, really got into it. And they did the same thing with watches. They took these items that were necessarily more expensive, and they tried to make them for the mainstream. And I think there's not really enough discussion about this ability to take a tool that was once quite exclusive and to make versions of it that anyone could have. And arguably, no, the world doesn't need that many cameras or that many pieces of audio or video equipment and stuff like that. But the same people, or the same cultures, that brought us a lot of the inexpensive watches we like, were also responsible for making camera equipment that is amazingly high quality, but also affordable in the scheme of things. I mean, if it were up to the Europeans, it'd be Hasselblad and Leica still.
Okay. I'm going to slightly jump you back, because
Please.
I remember in 18-something, there was the first box camera.
The Brownie?
No, the Brownie was 1800s. So 1800, the first Brownie came out. So 1900, that was the first Brownie that came out. But 1880 something.
Can't believe I remember that.
But the Brownie was the first readily available. Now, so when you talk about the 80s, yes, we had this massive explosion, but the Brownie was the easy to shoot camera. You know, the Eastman Kodak company building the Brownie. That for me was, and so when you look back on those, I would say to you is, yes, that was the first commercial, readily available, easy to use camera.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So you're right. For many years,
me, that was the first time where you go, yeah, this worked. It was a roll film. It was a square format. And then you know, you can go into the Hasselblads and you can go into, you know, Leicas and all those things. But the Brownie and Kodak, this is why I constantly say, what a business. It really was there on papers, on everything. And, you know, it was absolutely, but when we look at, I think the biggest revolution, and this is where you go about 70s. I would go to you as I would say, let's say the end. Let's say World War II, roughly. World War I, there was photography happening, but World War II, there was this kind of instant images to newspaper scenario. And that made these things, instead of it being a sketch and things like that, it really jumped. Then you can go into, you know, things like the Vietnam War that really, really accelerated these cameras, the film, the whole thing. You saw these kind of super jumps. And that for me was one of those things where you look at how this imagery started kind of jumping. Then you've got things like, you know, people doing it for art and doing it for different ways. You know, and then I don't know, photography really had these jumps. Ansel Adams, that's one of the most amazing landscape photographers, I believe. But these are all my personal belief, because other
people also like Ansel Adams, George.
Yeah, no. But what I'm saying to you is, you know, I could go to you and say, you know, certain artists that people go, yeah, I'd like that, or I don't like that. I sometimes I look at certain artists and I'm like going, I absolutely love that, and even my wife goes, what the hell have you just brought, or what the hell have you just done? So that's that scenario of like watches, where you turn up and you know, I gave my wife a watch recently and it wasn't expensive, and she went to me and said, oh, I don't love it. And I was like, and, you know, that's the same with photography.
Painful.
But that's the same with photography, or same with anything, any of these hobbies, when you're learning about it. So, look, I just tell you, at school, that's what I did. Then I went to university. I went to Parsons in New York. Yes, I mean, I was in New York for 5 years. So I did university there, and then I worked out there as a photographer. And whenever I made money, I would go and either buy watches and trade them so I'd go to flea markets, or I'd buy photography. And those were my two kind of passions. I was on this kind of discovery of what type of photography, and also how photography, I loved how photography changed perceptions. So you think of perceptions in history. You think about that child, the napalm child, that changed perception. You think about, I think it's Rosa Parks in America, you know, the back of the bus. Right. You think about these type of images that really changed the perception of the world, the perception of how, and I think that was something I loved to discover how they did it. You know, it's not Latigue, it's someone came up with this decisive moment of when you choose to take the photograph, and you can wait every time. And they were talking about it, and
do most people take the shot too early? Is that it?
No, it's about just waiting to make sure. Look, we take too many photographs anyway.
We're allowed to now.
And we probably miss the actual moment.
Back when you only had a few shots, you had to be a lot more selective, right? When you pull the shutter down.
And that was the thing. And I'm trying Haircuty Brasson, one of the most amazing photographers, and he had this amazing image. So, and I'm going to try and his photograph was absolutely amazing, where it was someone and it was jumping into. So they were stepping, and in the background, the same position. So they were stepping into water, and then there was a ballerina in the background of a circus, and everything was about decisive moment. And so what I would say to you is, these are the things that I grew up on. I grew up on and collected and loved. And that was the thing, is loving these photographs and seeing how this perception changed. And you looked at them, and even for the most controversial photography as well. So you could go to, pushing the envelope, Jesse Bites by, oh my God, my brain's.
You're giving people so much to Google. I love this.
So I should be Googling. This is me downloading over to you, but there's kind of things like Andrea Serrano, that something called Piss Christ, that people started trying to throw paint at and rip down because it was very much challenging religion. Jesse
and they're
Bites,
still doing that in the Louvre today.
Yeah, no, but that's what I would say, is that these things that were so immediate and so, this is something that was instant kind of, here's an image, we develop it, we build it, and someone spent time to take that photograph. And that was where I loved documentary photographers, and I love when some of these photographers pushed the envelope. So that's kind of me kind of boring everyone to death, I'm sure. But what I'd say to you is, some images, if you deep dive into it and you understand. So there's a thing about Jesse Bites that's I think it's an amazing photograph, and I can't remember who did it, and I think it's Sally Mann. Sally Mann did the photograph. And everyone thought it was very paedophiliac and very much, this is very dodgy. But it was her taking photographs of her children doing normal things. And but it was because it was an exhibition of it, they thought, but it was basically a photograph of Jessie with a arm of her brother, and it was the bite mark on his arm. And it was just there was an innocence that you would probably take as a photograph now of your children doing something, but because she exhibited it, it became so controversial, and she was so controversial.
So it's the art. You really love the photography itself. It's the art.
I love what they do. You think about Annie Leibovitz. Everyone knows Annie Leibovitz. The Vanity Fair front covers, she's the one, but she is a magician on how she puts the people together and how it becomes these pieces of art.
So help me reconcile something here that I'm trying to figure out. An interesting thing about photography is I haven't been to nearly as many shoots and stuff as you, but I'm a photographer, and I've spent plenty of time around other professional photographers, some really good ones. And something I've noticed, which is kind of weird, is unlike the watch space or everyone is really into the tool, in photography, even if they're using expensive, good equipment, I've noticed that a lot of photographers aren't as emotionally interested in the tools. They like the process, they like the people, all that, but the tools are almost disposable. They don't really think too much about it. They couldn't even always tell you so much. It's like they know how to use them, but beyond that, they don't sort of nerd out in it. And I wonder if you've also noticed that there's this difference between some photographers that like the photography equipment and others that don't. Sometimes actually the better artists seem to care less about the equipment, and the people that nerd out about it more. Maybe they know everything you can do with it, but aren't as creative. But you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I think the digital revolution has killed a lot of the love. Because, I remember, so I worked as a photographer. So, that was my first career choice. I still own a photographic studios here in London. And it's a very, very good business. We rent it out to photo shoots all the time. But when and I was growing when I finished Parsons. That was the start of the digital revolution. So I would say to you so I've got qualifications as a master printer. I've got all these different things that I was always about the, how following it all the way through, understanding everything through.
Picture to print, right?
Picture to print, but it was my picture. And what happened was when I started working for clients, can you go up a bit? Can you go left a bit? Can you go right a bit? Can you do this? Can you do that? Oh, my phone looks better from this angle. This, can we move everything? And what happened is you became less, you came up with the concept, but then it became a group concept for it, because all you would have is a Polaroid. That was the most instant you'd get. Now, then the digital revolution happened. And so I was on these kind of, I was a Hasselblad fan, and I was a 503, 501 to start off with, 503s. And then we had a digital back on them. Very rudimental, very kind of like first days. And, that for me was those kind of things of understanding that I could, I was more or less on film. So like when I worked I worked on some great photo shoots when I was an assistant, and it was film. And then when we switched over to digital, it became almost, even the photographers I worked with were still passionate, but it was just started kind of them going, so the client wants this, the client wants that. And, I always say the client gets on without us, we can't get on without the client. So it's very much, but what happened is that kind of, maybe the love affair of the development of the film and the things like that. That's why I believe a lot of people are going back to Rollies, the old Rolleiflex, the double camera, double lens Rolleiflex. I'm seeing a lot more of, I'm going to say it like this: hip cats are now kind of using the old Rolleiflexes, old Leicas with film, and starting to kind of get back that thing of saying, I can't wait to develop this in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. I can't wait because I've made that decision to take that photograph, instead of I've got umpteen million photographs on my phone. I mean, that's the problem, is my phone has destroyed my want for photography.
I again, this conversation could go
on and on
really
and on.
On and on and on, just like watches. We're out of time, so I want to sort of wrap it up.
Sorry, guys.
It's okay. It's good. I want to wrap it up and bring it a little bit back to watches, because I think a natural tendency for anyone who's not into photography to say, oh, I'd like to get into that. And I think there's a lot of wrong ways to get into photography. And one of the things that comes to mind is, and you've been there, you've seen it at a lot of watch events, it has become yet another aspirational thing to do, is to get an expensive hobbyist camera. Not really what else to call it. It's not really what a professional would per se have, even though it's professional grade. But you have all these people with these, not the full-size cameras, but I'll call them point and shoots, for lack of a better term, the Leicas and things like that. And it's much more camera than they need. It's not their phone. And is it kind of amusing to you that we've kind of come full circle, and now photography, at least vis-a-vis the equipment, has become sort of an aspirational show-off thing? Like, I don't know that I never would have guessed going into this with my camera equipment to shoot watches, again, very practical, not trying to show off, that other people will be like, well, I don't really take pictures of watches, but I want to seem like I do.
I could imagine a comic, a cartoon, one of those Saturday Night Live episodes of a watch event, and everyone with 20 cameras around their neck, but actually they use their iPhone. Expensive
lanyard, they get the third party one,
but they use their iPhone to take the photograph. I would say to you is there is some huge talents. There are some huge talents with some amazing, when you see some people and you go, how the hell did they get that photograph from that? And, that's something that, so I would never criticize on some people getting into it. You asked about how would you get into it today? And for me, my biggest problem I have is the iPhone is so good that when you look at it, when you're looking at what you want to get out of it, start getting your perspective there. My son is he's starting to love photography, same with my daughter. And they're both saving up for cameras. I am telling them to get a Nikon because you can change lenses. I think it's, an SLR type camera, digital or film, it doesn't matter. Go into it and save up and get something like that because it feels good in the hand. It's designed, it's and it's not showy. It's been on war zones. It's been everywhere. It's one of those things that I think is a good camera. And so for me,
it's like the watches. Start with Japanese.
We'll start with Japan, but Nikon, Nikon or Canon. And
I'm a Canon guy. They're both good.
You're a Canon guy. The
Fuji
thing
Olympus, I give him credit.
Yeah, Fuji, but those would be the ways I would say go and have a look at. Go and discover that. But also the other thing is go and find an old point and shoot 36 camera, like with just a really simple film, and go and find one of the simplest point and shoots that you can buy vintage, and you can buy it on eBay. And I've gone down this world of eBay at the moment of finding old cameras for my kids, and I keep on saying to them, and they're like, no, I want to get a new one. So they're saving up themselves, and these things aren't cheap, so they're going to be saving for quite a while. But the great thing about it is, my kids are already doing some beautiful photographs on their phone, and to then switch out and see them to get onto cameras, I think is a perfect progression.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to chat more about photography. I hope everyone enjoyed this chat with George Bamford about photography and other things.
I pray I haven't bored you. I really pray I haven't bored you.
That was the point. That was the point. For those that you don't know.
To bore people? Please say no.
Well, look, to someone who doesn't like watches, these conversations about watches are boring. So we're assuming that if you're into this topic, you'll like it if we're talking about watches or something that we're equally as passionate about watches, and cameras and other stuff is a big part of that. So, so it's interesting. George is, among many other things, the founder of Bamford London. So go to their website and check out their stuff. George, thank you so much for being on this episode of the Superlative Podcast.
I've loved every minute of it. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening.